Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Islamic Awakening with me, Reza Ghazim. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is central to defining Islam. The role that his actions and sayings play in defining how Islam is practiced cannot be overstated. Also, the Quran has not confined this prophet to the followers of Islam, as per the term Rahmatul lil Alameen.
It is said Prophet Muhammad had a great style of leadership coupled with a unique style of communication. This, many say, led to the propagation of Islam, not just within Arabia but beyond. The Prophet was described as a skillful leader during both times of war and times of peace, which aided him in delivering the message of Islam. He communicated and practiced values of liberty, justice and politeness. All these actions resonated with the people at the time and proved to them that he was a great leader. Prophet Muhammad's life is full of countless examples of superior morality and good habits that show his status as a role model for Muslim societies at all times.
Because he preached peace and prosperity for mankind.
He himself was an example. He was, whatever he taught, he practically did the same things himself. He was a very just person. He was a very honest person. He was for the rights. Difficult to encapsulate in in few sentences, but his life itself is an example to the mankind.
To address these and other issues, we have our esteemed guest, Professor Tariq Ramadan. Welcome to the program.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. I wanted to start off by asking, how has the Quran made out that the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the most best role model that we could have?
Look, there is a verse in the Quran where this is clearly stated, and out also of the understanding of even the Shahada, that the testimony that you are a Muslim, you can understand how important is this. First, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. There is indeed in the Prophet, in the Messenger of God, the best example for you, so the must model that you have to follow. And at the same time, when you enter to Islam, when you acknowledge that you are a Muslim, what you say is that La ilaha illallah, there is no God but God, it is the only deity, only God, and then wa Muhammadun Rasulullah, and then the Prophet, peace be upon him, is the messenger, by being at the same time a human being, because this is something which is very important. This is the big difference between us and Christianity, is that we don't consider prophets as divine, and it's a human being. And he said, "Ana basharum mithlukum." This is what in the Quran, I'm a human being like you are. And then all the prophets, and the last one, the last prophet and messenger, is a human being. And then out of this, we understand that we are following the last revelation, acknowledging him as a model, and a very important means for us to come close to God.
One of the things that happened right at the start was that the Prophet, prior to his prophethood and proclaiming the prophetic mission, he was well liked in Meccan society. What made the preaching that he was talking about, what made that change? Why did that attitude start to change?
It's important for us, from an Islamic perspective, from our understanding, to remember that God decided that he was going to be the messenger before he was, in fact, the messenger. And this is why we also call him Al-Mukhtar, the one who was chosen, and then Al-Mustafa, the one who was purified from the very beginning. So there are qualifications and features that we find in him before he became the messenger that were everywhere. So this is why we find in the Quran, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You are a person, a human being with good characters, good behavior. So this was acknowledged by everybody, and he was called as-Sadiqul Amin, the one who is trustworthy and truthful. So this is something which is important. And then this was very important, and we have to get this as Muslims and also as human beings. As long as he was within the frame, within the system, within the power structure of his society, no problem. We find we acknowledge your qualities, your ethical behavior, and he was very and deeply respected. It is when he came with the message, and the message saying there is only one God. And they understood it quite clearly, that as all the prophets and the messengers before the prophet, peace be upon him, were coming, is that they are shaking the power struggle, the power system.
Before we explore that further, I just want to ask about any examples of how you can say that the Meccan society, because actually respected him, or the Meccan power structure even, respected him prior to him proclaiming his prophethood.
Many stories that we have. First, something which was very important when they were rebuilding the Kaaba, and then they were looking and saying, who is going to say, and they were struggling, who is going to have the privilege of putting the black stone? And they said the first one who is coming will be the one who will be the judge. And he came, and they were all happy because he was the one that they were all trusting, and he found a way to reconcile them. The other things that we have about him is that when he received the revelation, was telling him, if I tell you that behind this mountain there are enemies, are you going to trust me, to believe and say, yes, we always thought good about you and praise your qualities and your ethics and your behavior. So in fact, this is where some who were very much trusting the Prophet as a human being, when they heard about the message, this is where they followed him. So the qualities before became the proofs after. For others, it was the opposite, because they were blinded and blind when it came to their power, by saying, oh, all what you were before is forgotten now because you are shaking the structure of power within the society, which once again we have to get it right. It's not because you come with a message of peace that all the people are going to be peaceful with you. And this is a very long tradition. It happened with Moses, it happened with Jesus, peace be upon them, and all the prophets. And what did they get coming from the people? People don't want, they want the status quo. وَوَجَدْنَا آبَاءَنَا كَذَلِكَ يَفْعَلُونَ. We find our forefathers doing like this, so we have to protect this. No, no, no. When it comes to God, when it comes to truth, anything that is against it, whatever it is, your culture or your power structure, this has to be questioned. And this is what the Prophet, peace be upon him, did.
It's interesting that you say that. And one of the things that actually happened at the time was that the Prophet Muhammad was actually offered the leadership of Mecca, and perhaps you can explain how that happened. And then my actual question regarding this is that would it not have been sensible for him to have taken that power and said, right, you've acknowledged me as a leader, so now I'm going to spread Islam now that I'm your leader?
Yes. So first, yes, when they saw that he was committed, and they say, okay, look, he's not going to stop this. Now we are ready to give you money, to give you power, to give you women, whatever you want, but stop. He said, no, you can give me the sun in my right hand or the moon in my left hand. I'm not going to stop until this is going to be achieved. This is the mission. So the point is that they were reading his mission through their lenses, saying, oh, it's about money, it's about power. He came with something which was completely different. It's about truth, it's about serving God and serving humanity. So in this, there is no strategy. You are not, you're not trading with principles. So he came with something which was quite clear.
But that is a strategy, isn't it? That is a strategy that, that you're not actually, you're not going to trade your principles. That's an absolute, there's no compromise in that, is there?
So, yes, we can speak about a strategy. I would say it's a position of principles that I'm not going to. So now, whatever you say, whatever you do to me, I'm not going to stop. First, my trust is in God. This is something which is very important, because if you try to play with things, and it happened once, that the Prophet, peace be upon him, tried to put the strategy before the principle, and then God came into it. When he was talking to the powerful in his country, in Mecca, trying to protect the community, and a poor old blind man come to him. He came to him asking about the Quran, and he dismissed him because he was protecting the community. And the Quran is for the first time coming very straight to the question, said, Abasa wa tawalla, that you neglect this poor in order to talk to the powerful. That was wrong. You had to give due respect to the one who is asking about truth, and not to forget him for the sake of these powerful people. Which means, be careful. Strategies are okay as long as they are not coming against your principles. And in what you were saying, and the true question, it's a very interesting question that you have. Why didn't he accept this power and then use the power to change? Because you don't compromise on principles. So you have your principles, you have your mission, and then you have to be transparent and consistent. This is the way he was, and this is the way we, as Muslims, we have to be very, very clear on this. Any political strategy is welcome, as long as you don't betray your principles.
And so within that context, what moral values was he using to actually make sure that this idea was going to continue to be generated?
I think first, there is something which is important in the Quran. When Allah is talking about believers, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, those who believe and do good deeds. What does it mean? It means consistency between what you preach and the way you are. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, was the model for this. Consistent. I'm preaching the truth, I go and I am truthworthy. Meaning that he was consistent and trying to serve the people and never having this kind of contradictions that we can find. This is very important. Why? Because many people were looking at his behavior, not only at the words, it's the behavior. And he was, in fact, very often his first answer to the people who were attacking him was by quoting the Quran. And this is why the first instance in the Quran about jihad has to do with an intellectual jihad through the Quran. لا تطع الكافرين وجاهدهم به جهادا كبيرا. Don't obey the disbelievers or the people who are denying God and struggle with them by the means of the Quran. So this is the way he was, consistent, and all the great features and moral features that he had before, he was using them afterward. There is a second thing which is very important in the way he was, in fact, morally quite powerful, even though politically speaking he was not. He was followed by the poor people. In fact, like all the messengers, all the prophets. And even the rich people in Mecca say, look, are your followers. Look at the people who are following you. They are all just marginalized. These are the poor people. And then the Quran is making it clear to the Prophet, peace be upon him, don't go astray. Don't dismiss them. Don't neglect them. These are the people, out of their sincerity, that are going to be the more spiritually powerful to change the world. And this is something which is important.
What was so attractive about the poor? Why did the Prophet attract, if you like, the poor people more initially than, let's say, anyone else? Why was the influence greater on them? You know, what did they like about him?
Yeah, there are three things that are important here. The first revelations coming to the Prophet, peace be upon him, were all dealing with look at the poor in a new way. كَلَّا بَلْ لَا تُكْرِمُونَ الْيَتِيمَ. You don't give dignity to the poor people. So your conversion with your heart coming back to God is a conversion with your world coming to the poor people. That's very important. To the point that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was asking God to love them, not only to serve them. This is very important. Allahumma nas'aluka hubb al-masakin. We are asking you to love the poor people and also to be loved by the poor people. The second thing which is important, the powerful in the society, they don't want to change. They want the status quo. They want it up because this is their power. The poor, they are ready for change. So all the prophets, all the messengers, peace be upon them all, were in fact followed by the poor people, ready for the struggle to change, for more justice, for more dignity, for more equality among human beings. And the third dimension here, which is very important in the Islamic tradition, is in fact you are never as close to God. You can't never be close to God if you are not close to the poor people. This is why surrounding the mosque of the Prophet in Medina, you have the poor people. This is why when we fast, when we even think about our pilgrimage, it's all about caring about the poor people. One of the pillars of Islam, with the zakat, is caring about the poor people. So there is something which is very powerful here, is that in fact we are not following the Christian tradition saying that the poor people are going to be in paradise and not the rich people. No, it depends what you are doing with your richness and your wealth. It depends what you are going to do with your havings. But there is something here which is important, that struggling against social injustice is helping you through the spiritual involvement to change yourself and the society for the better.
Lots of interesting points, and we'll pick those up. We do like to keep this show as interactive as possible and value your opinion. Here is what you sent us today.
This week we asked, why is the Prophet a good role model for the Muslim community? Raymond from Spain says, each action and saying of the Prophet Muhammad is an expression of a great sense of humanity in close connection with the divine. And Sabina from the UK says, those who encountered the Prophet Muhammad experienced a spiritual awakening, both submission and peace, as they trod on the path of Islam. And that's all the comments we have for this week. Don't forget to leave your views on our Facebook and Twitter page.
One of the things, Tariq, that you have talked about is this idea that there's the way the Prophet was, and especially I want to explore this idea that how did his attitude or the perception of him change from when he was in Mecca and when he was in Medina, especially when you talk about within the context that his principles were the same, they did not change, what he did was the same. So why is that perception there about his time in Mecca and his time in Medina?
Yes, it's an important question, because very often Orientalists and people who are studying Islam, they come with this, oh, you know what, he was a pacifist in Mecca and he became a war leader in Medina, which is completely wrong.
This is touching on his kind of morality and this, kind of his being, as it were.
The being, and even his intention, is that, he used religion to become a world leader, and then he became someone who wanted to impose Islam onto the others. This is a very old Orientalist narrative that we know. And this is where, as Muslims, we have to come and to study these two different periods. First, the passive resistance was the first attitude of the Prophet, peace be upon him, was the passive resistance, and it happened that Ammar, Yasir, Sumayya, these people were, Yasir and Sumayya were killed, the first martyrs in Islam, and Ammar had to do, and Bilal, they were tortured, and then passive resistance. We are not going to enter into this. We are not going to respond by violent means to the violence that people and the people of Quraysh were imposing onto the Muslims. And then at one point it became too much. So they went to Abyssinia, they were protected by Najashi. So we have the story here where we can see that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was trying to find a way not to respond. And in fact it was also educational, which is a sabr, which is perseverance. We know very often we translate sabr by patience. It's not this. It's patience, perseverance, and even endurance is patience in action. So he was carrying on this, preaching the message, spreading around the Islamic principles, and facing oppression, and this was a way also of educating people.
You're talking about him facing oppression, but the people that you've mentioned, so for example, Bibi Sumayya, Hazrat Ammar Yasir, and so on, they were the ones that were getting the brunt of it. So how did the two relate to each
No,
other? So what was
himself.
it?
No, that's true. You have companions, and very often they were also targeting the poor people or the slaves. For example, Bilal, before he was in fact freed, was tortured. So they were quite smart in this. It's just how you don't touch the leader, but you touch all the people and the companions around. But at the same time, he himself, at one point, they wanted to kill him. So this is why also he left Mecca and he went to Medina, and then he settled there. What happened is that what was a passive resistance then, what the people of Mecca started to do is to take the money, to take their belongings in Mecca and to betray. So these were the ethical principles among the Arab tribes, that you don't do things like this. And then came the verse saying, أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ يُقَاتَلُونَ بِأَنَّهُمْ ظُلِمُوا. So what Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was saying when we heard this verse saying, now is justified and legitimate for those who have been oppressed to resist, because what they wanted is not to let them out of this hijrah, this exile, to be able to live in peace there. They wanted to destroy them. So not only they oppressed them in Mecca, but they wanted to destroy them in Medina. So now there is something which is called legitimate resistance. And this was the way the Prophet, peace be upon him, was reacting to oppression. I'm not going to react, but if now you want to destroy us, it's legitimate for us to resist your oppression and your exploitation. This is the meaning of everything that happened in the Prophet's life.
And was there a shift in the morality and him as a role model that changed in those two periods that you're talking about? Or was it the same, or were the principles the same?
Yes, I think that this is a very essential question, because what we were talking about, the Orientalists were saying he changed. No, he didn't change as to the principles. Even, for example, in anything which has to do with legitimate resistance. Legitimate resistance means that if you are destroying me, I have the right to protect myself, which in fact is an international law. So if you list, all the people, all the nations today are praising the people who were resistant to oppression. Why don't we get this from the Prophet's life, which is very important, legitimate resistance? And even in this situation, not only the goals should be ethical, but the means that you are using. And when he sent Usama, who was very young, to the north, and this was just before he was to pass, to die, and then Abu Bakr as-Siddiq confirmed the mission. He said, you don't touch the women, the children, the religious people, and you respect nature. This is what we call today ethics of war. So the principles were all the same. You don't torture, even you don't mistreat the body of the dead people. This is something which is completely, all the principles are the same. But the enemies were not doing the same, and they were having other strategies. So what is very important, and this is why your question is essential, is to reconnect the two periods of time and to see that the same principles were implemented in different contexts with the same vision and the same objective.
So in terms of drawing on the Prophet as a role model for Muslims today, how can the principles that perhaps have been talked about be utilized in deciding, what Muslims do, how behave?
First, what is very important is that to understand that what we find in the Quran is that if we were angels, God would have sent angels. But we are human beings, and He sent human beings. And that we have to understand that we only worship God even though we love the Prophet, peace be upon him, and we have to nurture this love. We have to remember this, because at the end of his life, Umar radiallahu anhu was not very happy and said, anyone who is saying that he's dead, I'm going to kill him. And that this is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq who said, those who were worshipping Muhammad should know that he passed away. But if you worship God, he is alive and he doesn't die. This is a very important point, and then out of this we have to take from his principles, his ethics, and also the way he was dealing with his companions as well as with his enemies.
Thank you for that, Tariq. The centrality of the Prophet to exemplifying Islam cannot be overestimated. The challenge to existing systems of oppressive power is what caused the Prophet to be unpopular in Meccan society. In fact, he refused to be embedded in the power structure, but engage it and challenge it from outside. What challenges does that throw up for the Muslims in contemporary society? Unfortunately, the time is up for today's topic. I would like to thank Professor Tariq Ramadan for his views on the topic, and of course all of you at home for watching. Goodbye until the next time and another edition of Islamic Awakening.